Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you to everyone for coming out tonight. I'm Liz Weigel. I'm one of the city planners with the city who's managing the East Area Plan. Thank you for coming out tonight. I know many of you have been following this process for a long time. Some of you might have just recently heard about the plan and want to learn more, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm just gonna walk through our agenda. We really want to dedicate most of the meeting to community members to allow you to ask questions, share comments about the draft plan. We'll start with a short presentation just to remind everyone what the East Area Plan is and some of the key updates we've made. And then we'll devote time to question and answers. To help us make sure we can get to as many people as possible, we're going to ask that you enter your question in the question and answer box, and you should see a tab at the bottom of your screen that says Q&A where you can type that in. And you can just start doing that at any point during the presentation, and then we'll call on you as we get to the question and answer portion. And then we'll leave a little time at the end to just go over next steps. Before we get started, I wanted to thank Councilwoman Sawyer and Councilwoman Herndon for joining us tonight. And I believe Councilwoman Sawyer is on and wanted to say a few remarks. So I'll let you speak now.
Thanks, Liz. Well, I just wanted to welcome everyone tonight and thank you all for joining us. I really want to thank Liz and Kurt in particular for all of their hard work, and to all of our steering committee members for all of their hard work over the last 3 years. You know, this has been a long road and a long process, and we're coming to the end here, which is really exciting. You know, one of the things that we have really wanted to make sure that we did was bring as much community engagement into this process as possible. It's really important that we do that. And we have been able to really be able to get a lot of feedback from people. It's really fantastic, you know, how much community engagement we have been able to include in this NPI process. So that is really wonderful. But I did want to just remind everyone of a couple of things as we are engaging in this process. I know this is getting to the end. There are a lot of hot button issues. And I know that, you know, there are right now with COVID going on, with a recession, with everything that has been happening this summer, tensions are really high. So I just want to remind everyone that we really need to be treating everyone with respect on this call all the time. It's really important. So a couple of ground rules as we kind of get started here. Most importantly, we want to make sure that this is an inclusive process. Everyone here is welcome. Everyone's got ideas. They are not going to be the same, and that's okay. This is a tough conversation that we have. I always say, and everyone laughs at me, probably the best thing that we're going to do here is get to a place where no one is happy. But that is the goal, right? That is the place of compromise. And that is sort of probably where our best, you know, where our best place is going to be here. So keep that in mind. Everyone is welcome, and we are aiming for inclusive and inclusivity. Please keep your questions and comments brief so everyone's got time to participate. So, you know, everyone will hopefully get one opportunity to speak, and then we'll go back for second opportunities for people. And, you know, we will try and make sure that we, you know, as we're going through all of our questions on Q&A, we give everyone, you know, the first chance to speak, and then we'll go back. Second is just please keep it respectful. You know, tensions are real, and that is okay. But discussing the ideas and not the people is something that we really need to stick to as a rule, as a ground rule. It's really important that we keep this respectful. So, you know, we really appreciate everyone being here tonight. Thank you all for sharing your ideas and your thoughts. You know, sharing your concerns and your frustrations is okay. We appreciate that too. But, you know, let's keep it respectful. Let's keep it thoughtful. And let's see if we can come up with a plan here that works, you know, for everybody that is a compromise. So thanks very much. And we look forward to moving forward. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sawyer, for setting the tone, and thank you again to everybody for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us tonight. So just to follow up on that, again, for participating this evening, we really want to give everyone a chance to participate. And remember, everyone is welcome. And again, if we can be respectful of each other, that would be greatly appreciated, because we know these are difficult conversations. We'll ask you to enter your comment into that Q&A box, and we have a number of our planning team members who are kind of monitoring that box, and will call on participants to ask their questions live. In terms of how we sort through them, we're going to try to prioritize questions first, so that everyone kind of shares from that benefited answer to those questions. But we will certainly get to comments if we can, and we will also make sure that all the comments are shared on the website. So anything you're typing in will be shared with the video of tonight's meeting. As Councilwoman Sawyer stated, we're try to keep your questions or comments brief, so we have more time to get to everyone. We're going to try to stick to about 2 minutes per speaker, which hopefully should be enough time for most people to get through their question. And we'll start with trying to call everybody once, so that everyone has that chance. And just a reminder that we do have frequently asked questions and responses on our website that we encourage you to review for some of the common questions that we're getting about the plan. And when we get to the Q&A portion, we do have a number of our team members from different departments throughout the city who are here to help answer questions. So in addition to me, there's Kurt from Community Planning and Development, who's also project manager on the plan. We have Mike Gill and Stephen Reho from Transportation and Infrastructure, Irene Aguilar from our NEST team, Melissa Toddy and Jennifer Siegel from Housing Stability, and Joanne Greek from Economic Development and Opportunity. So quickly, before we jump into the presentation, we'd like to get a sense of who's participating in the call. So if you could answer which neighborhood you live or work in on this poll, that'll just give us a quick sense of who's on the call this evening. So we'll give you just a minute or so to fill that out. Looks like right about now we have about 97 people on the call. Okay, give you 20 more seconds. Okay, I'm gonna end the poll. It looks like we have about 30 people from South Park Hill, and then a handful from the other neighborhoods in the plan area. Stop sharing that. Can we close that? Okay, there we go. So I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, who's going to do some of the introductory slides. Kurt.
Thanks, Liz. And hi, everyone. Kurt Upton, one of the planners with Community Planning and Development. I'm just going to kind of go over some of the brief background before we get into the updates that were made to the draft plan. So the draft plan, if any of you have not already viewed it, is on our project website there at the bottom, denvergov.org/eastplan. The second draft is on our website. Go to the next one. Thanks, Liz. So we are concluding a 3-year process. We are at the far right, the green spot on this timeline. We are making final updates to the draft plan. We will be moving this forward on September 16th to the planning board, and we will have a informational item on at the planning board on September 16th. We'll have our final steering committee meeting later that month on September 23rd. And then in October and November, we will have public hearings at both the planning board and city council. I am going to review some of the highlights of the plan. Consistently throughout the 3-year process, we've kind of heard 6 key recommendations that have risen to the top in terms of priorities. The first has to do with preventing involuntary displacement of both residents and small businesses, and helping as these neighborhoods change over the next 20 years, that we are doing what we can by supporting existing residents and businesses stay in the East area if they'd like to, using our resources, including housing options and affordability programs that we have that are geared towards both residents and businesses. Next is similar to that recommendation, but it's actually adding additional housing, so adding more supply of housing than we have today in the East area. Denver is growing, as we all know. It's projected to continue to grow over the next 20 years, and if we don't sufficiently increase the supply of housing in our neighborhoods, then prices will rise as people move to the city, as we've seen over the past 10 to 20 years. And so making sure that we are keeping the East area an inclusive place in the future by increasing the supply of affordable housing in particular, using all of our available methods that we have at our disposal in the city. Colfax Avenue has been a key point of emphasis. Colfax touches every neighborhood in the East area. It's long been seen as a street that has been difficult to navigate if you're a pedestrian. It's oftentimes it has been seen as an uncomfortable place to walk along, and a boundary, and sort of divisive in terms of trying to cross, and kind of seen as more of a street that separates people than brings people together. And so the vision for Colfax is to make it a place that actually brings and unites the different neighborhoods and diverse community members together in a pedestrian-friendly Main Street feel. The East area also contains some of the best neighborhoods in the city if you're into architectural history. And so that's been a long-standing value throughout the 3-year process, to make sure that we are preserving these neighborhoods and encouraging new housing when new housing or additions do get added to the neighborhoods, to make sure that they are have high quality design standards and really fit in well with the existing character of the neighborhood. Trees and open space has also been a common theme and a top priority throughout the process. In particular, preserving the existing beautiful mature tree canopy we have in the neighborhoods and landscaped areas, adding additional open space, and making sure we're taking kind of a best practices approach to adding trees and landscaping in open spaces, where we're using those spaces as dual purpose infrastructure to help manage some of the stormwater issues and the flooding issues that we do see in areas throughout the East area. Saving lives and reducing pollution by making our streets safer for walking, bicycling, and using public transportation. This has been top of mind, especially for some of the key streets that we've heard, 13th, 14th, 17th, 16th, making sure that those streets are safe for our children and all of our residents to traverse on a day-to-day basis. So we are, as I mentioned before, we're concluding a 3-year planning process. We've had the first draft of the plan open for public comment for several months. We've received over 1,100 comments from over 450 participants. Many of those comments focused on clarifications and small changes. We have made a significant number of what we would consider substantive changes to the plan. And so all of those are documented in the plan, and we'll be touching on some of those later in the presentation tonight. I think with that, I'm turning it back over to Liz to walk through some of those updates.
Great, thanks, Kurt. And this, if you've looked at our website, you might have seen some of the common themes that we've heard in the draft plan comments. I'll just walk through these briefly. You know, as from the beginning, building heights and neighborhood housing options have kind of been our the recommendations we've received the most feedback on, and the most that we've evolved over time as we've gotten community input. We continue to receive comments about the height map and the recommendations around height, in both directions: support for more height in specific areas, support for reducing the height in specific areas. We've heard comments on those. For housing options in neighborhoods, again, hearing from both sides, concerns about additional housing and some of the negative impacts people feel they may have, and concerns that our language is too limiting and should allow for more flexibility and more housing to happen in our residential neighborhoods. A need that's even more pronounced, I'd say now with the pandemic, for anti-displacement strategies, both for residents and our businesses, and for affordable housing tools to make sure that people can stay. Continue to hear that safety is a top priority when we're talking about transportation, for pedestrians, for bicyclists, for all modes to feel safe and have those options in the neighborhoods. Mixed opinions about the bus rapid transit project, which is distinct from the East Area Plan, but again, concerns about its impacts, and also many feeling like we should take more advantage of bus rapid transit in terms of heights and densities in the area. A desire for more direction for new parks, feeling that the recommendations around Mayfair Town Center were the most specific, and there were not a lot of other specifics around parks. And a desire to strengthen our green infrastructure and environmentally resilient recommendations. Here. So as Kurt said, we've been through in this process since July of 2017. And we started with discussing community vision, needs, and concerns. And since then, we've released 2 drafts of recommendations, a draft plan, and now we recently shared the second draft of the plan. And we've received thousands of comments during that time. And we've come to a place where we're trying to balance the input we've received while ensuring that we're still working towards that vision that Kurt explained. And I'm going to go over 5 key topics where we've received the most input and just kind of talk through how those have evolved over time. So first, as I mentioned, building heights has been a key discussion point. And unlike existing adopted plans in the area, which provide general height guidance or no height guidance at all if you read our existing neighborhood plans, the East Area Plan proposes very specific areas where additional height would be allowed and under what circumstances. The plan proposes to keep many areas at 3 stories and 5 stories to encourage preservation of character buildings and small lot development, and to allow additional height only in key areas where people would benefit from living close to transit and amenities, and where transitions to residential areas can be achieved. The plan, and this has evolved over time, is specific about community benefits that would have to be provided if height is increased above existing zoning. This includes on-site affordable units, a new park in the Mayfair Town Center area, affordable commercial space or community serving uses, and to help preserve an existing what we call character buildings, some of our older, more historic buildings along Colfax. We've added to the recommendation to recommend inclusive engagement as we develop regulations to implement this plan, or to implement this recommendation. Making sure we're integrating our tools for affordability. So those other tools that we talk about in the housing section should be integrated as we implement the height recommendations. And also to improve those transitions to residential areas. And this rendering that you see on the right side is in the plan on page 42, and you can see how it shows improvements in the transition as you get closer to residential areas from Colfax. And this slide is to remind you about sort of where we started on building heights over a year ago now in May, and where we are today. And our first map had most areas at 5, 8, or more stories along Colfax. And we've really tailored that more in the current height map and how it's evolved over time, again, to target those areas that are closest to transit, that have sort of the larger lots with depth, and don't encourage losing our character buildings. So next, I wanted to touch on the second major topic, which is housing options in our residential neighborhoods. And this is really a recommendation that's striving to achieve sort of those goals that Kurt mentioned about how the East can continue to be a diverse and inclusive place that provides opportunities for a variety of households. And that's something that we've heard about many times from community members about the history of the East area and how it had that diversity, and we don't want to lose it. And at the same time, we want to preserve our architectural history and existing homes and not encourage scrapes that we maybe have seen in our neighborhoods or seen in neighborhoods around the city. So the plan has evolved over time to recommend several strategies to achieve those goals. They include updating our zoning regulations to discourage demolition and ensure new housing is compatible. So we're going to right size our zoning so that our older houses are encouraged to stay and new housing fits in better. Allowing accessory dwelling units, which are, you might think of as a basement unit or a house or a unit over your garage, and all lots throughout the East area. And in addition to that, integrating additional housing, so you could think of a duplex, a triplex, a row house, interspersed through our single and 2 unit areas and in appropriate locations. And we're recommending doing this through a citywide process, and the plan provides guidance for that process about what things should be considered as we look to implement that recommendation. And lastly, we're also recommending that we survey our neighborhoods for historic significance. I think we know there's a strong history in these neighborhoods, and we think it's warranted to survey them further and look to potentially designate certain areas as historic districts. Excuse me. And so this slide, again, like the heights map, was intended just to show you kind of where we started and how we got to where we were today. We started with the map that has the cross through there on the right back in May of last year it was more about specific recommendations for different areas of the East area plan. So there's some coloring on that map that showed different recommendations. And we received a lot of feedback on that. We had those of you who attended our workshop in November, we had a lot of conversation about what the right way was, how we should go about recommending more housing options. We heard concerns about some areas feeling targeted by being on the map, while others felt left out, that they didn't have an opportunity for additional housing options if they weren't in one of those areas. So based on that input, we removed that map from the plan. It's not in the draft. And now we have this area-wide recommendation that I described, which provides guidance for a citywide implementation. And in the latest draft, we did make some updates to clarify that guidance and add support for neighborhood-wide rezoning for ADUs, should those want to go forward, and ADUs, the accessory dwelling unit, before we have a citywide implementation of more housing options. So now I want to touch base on anti-displacement strategies. So a core vision of the East area plan is to ensure, again, that we have this diversity of small businesses and residents that can continue and stay long-term. Today, about a third of East residents are cost burdened, which means they're paying more than they can afford for rent or their mortgage. And small businesses face continuing challenges which have only gotten more dire with COVID-19. So through extensive community input, including recent work with the East Colfax Community Collective, we have strengthened both the affordable housing and small business recommendations by making clear that our priority for the height recommendation to achieve affordable housing, and adding recommendations that reduce barriers, particularly for immigrants and refugees. And lastly, to elevate our community voices and equity as we implement the plan. So keeping that lens, that equity lens in place as we go about implementation of the plan. Okay, next, I just got a couple more on mobility and transportation. So as Kurt mentioned, we have, or as I mentioned, we have received input with varying viewpoints on bus rapid transit. That project is distinct from the East Area Plan, though we are closely coordinating with that project. And the plans have our plan recommendations have evolved over time to address what we've heard is a priority, which is making East Area streets safer and slower for all modes, particularly those parallel to Colfax, which already see a lot of traffic today and may see diverted traffic from bus rapid transit. In the most recent draft, we did add safety improvements at multiple locations throughout all neighborhoods. That was based on community feedback. We added 2 north-south bikeway recommendations. We also added 8th Avenue as a transformative street. And we clarified our historic parkway guidance to make it clear that we want to preserve that historic character of the parkways while allowing for some enhanced pedestrian connections. And I just wanted to take a moment real quickly on here to highlight an example of, we've been talking about these recommendations for 3 years now, and I think a lot of people are eager to see change happen, particularly improvements that they're looking for. And I think there's a good example that our Department of Transportation and Infrastructure is moving forward with short-term safety improvements on 13th and 14th Avenue. And really that came directly out of these plans and recommendations for safety and intersection improvements. And that's moving forward in the short term. I think it's a good example of things that can come out of these plans and lead to quick implementation. So one thing I wanted to touch on was parking. We received a lot of questions about parking and what the plan says about it. And so we just wanted to clarify that point. To be clear, parking requirements exist today in our zoning code, and they vary by use. The plan recommends making it easier to use different modes of transportation, both to help ease car traffic through our neighborhoods, but also to help our planet by reducing car emissions. The plan specifically addresses parking in several places that are called out on this slide. One is to create neighborhood parking strategies. These can address things like hourly parking regulations and permits. So that's if we're seeing more demand for street parking in the future. We recommend evaluating parking impacts when we're allowing new housing options in the neighborhoods. So that's part of that recommendation for new housing options, to evaluate what the impacts for parking would be and the parking requirements. We recommend encouraging shared parking arrangements, such as parking garages in our commercial areas. And we suggest evaluating parking requirements to encourage some of our small scale development and adaptive reuse on small lots. Those smaller lots with the buildings that we all think are very special often face a lot of challenges with trying to be reused as something new. And that's a place where we do suggest that we should look at our parking requirements and what barriers they might be causing for that small scale development. I think I got 2 more slides. Quality of life, this is one of our parks and our environmentally resilient section of the plan. We received a number of comments about needing to have stronger recommendations for parks, open space, and green infrastructure. And based on input on the first draft, we've made several updates. One, to update our parks map to better illustrate park opportunities and priority areas. This includes large campuses, and you'll see on that map there that's in the plan, the orange areas are places that lack walkable park today. So those are really places that we should be looking for opportunities in the future to add new parks. We've incorporated strategies in riparian zones. This is kind of our historic waterways and ways that we can take advantage of those historic patterns. And we've added recommendations for new buildings to update standards for green infrastructure and resilient design. And lastly, we updated the Mayfair Town Center policy. Originally in the first draft, to highlight the potential use of the height incentive to help achieve a park in this area. And then we also added in the most recent draft a recommendation for a community planning process around that park, should it be created, to make sure that we're getting a park that works for everybody, but also making sure we're meeting those other goals for the Mayfair Town Center, like having our community serving uses and making sure the transportation network works well there. So on that point, I wanted to touch base on what the plan does say about Mayfair Town Center, because we have received that question. So as you just heard, we believe that Mayfair Town Center presents a real opportunity to truly serve as a community gathering space, to really be that center. And the plan recommends a number of recommendations for this area, which are highlighted in this rendering here. One is for a new neighborhood park, and that would be one that has a community gathering space and can help address stormwater management, because it is at a point that floods frequently in the neighborhood. We're recommending a mix of preserving existing buildings and community serving businesses, while also providing opportunities for new development that meets community needs. You can see in this rendering here, it's showing a grocery store relocated on the ground floor of a building with housing above. And then it also shows a shared parking structure that could be used amongst both the residences and the commercial businesses. And that's showing that new park space here with also preserved existing businesses and buildings. So this is really meant to demonstrate that mix of keeping what we love and then adding new community serving spaces. So with that, I think we're almost on time. So we're gonna jump into the Q&A, and this is just a reminder to put your questions into that Q&A box. And then we're gonna hand it over to Scott Robinson's gonna help with asking the questions, and we'll have our panelist team jump in to help answer them. And remember, try to keep your question brief to 2 minutes or less. And we will remind you if you start to go over that time. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Liz. As Liz said, my name is Scott Robinson. I'm also one of the planners working on this plan. I'm just going to be basically emceeing questions here. So I'm going to queue up a question and say who should be asking it. When I say your name, please use the raise hand function, which you should see down at the bottom of your screen. That'll help us find you so that we can unmute you to then ask your question. So hopefully that's clear. We're going to give this a try. So the first question is from Brt Stop, and it relates to displacement. So we'll go ahead and unmute Blair here so they can ask their question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Blair. I've lived in Denver for about 6 years now, and lived in 5 Points, Whittier, Capitol Hill, and now East Colfax. And you know, I saw Rhino and what happened, and how, you know, now artists can't afford to live there, even though that's what I guess brought people initially, and can't afford to eat there, and you know, so I'm wondering, what is the specific language that in the plan that will prevent displacement in a very like specific way, like numbers, measurables, and that's it.
Thanks, Blair. This is Liz. I'll take that one. And thanks for your continued participation in this process. I think you're right on that that's kind of one of our key goals of this plan, is to take steps to reduce that displacement and that risk, and more probably than any other neighborhood plan before. And we've really integrated that into this plan, and we've made it a priority and highlighted it with all of the major recommendations. And I'd say page 16 of the plan summarizes our recommendations in terms of what that policy guidance is. And really there's overall guidance in terms of the plan says stabilize residents at risk of involuntary displacement and preserve existing affordability. And then we have a number of strategies that we list under that recommendation that is about connecting residents to services, creating new services where we don't have them, and having those programs suggested. The way that we would use this plan is to, this helps inform budget decisions going forward and decisions that the city makes going forward. So really this is kind of a blueprint of strategies that we can use and tie into implementation of our projects going forward to make sure that we're keeping an eye on that. And the plan does also include for all of our topics what we call measurable goals. So it's really a way for us to take stock regularly on where we are with these goals, right? Do we still have that diversity of housing and housing prices? How cost burden are residents? So those types of things that we can check regularly and really keep ourselves accountable in terms of what's happening in the area.
All right, thanks, Liz. So up next, we have a question from Diane Deschanel about different housing options, duplexes, triplexes in Park Hill. So let me go ahead and mute Diane. Are you there, Diane?
Okay. Yes, I'm here. Yeah, I just wanted to know, it sounds as though my question was answered, but I'm not quite sure. I'd like a clarification. On the original map, it showed that a small part of South Park Hill from 17th to 23rd and Monaco to Quebec was going to be rezoned for duplexes, triplexes, and maybe quadruplexes. But the rest of South Park Hill was still zoned single-family homes. So it sounds as though the new plan calls for duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes scattered throughout the neighborhood. Is that correct?
Hi, Dan. This is Kurt Upton. I'll take that question. Thank you so much for asking that clarification. So you're right. The first draft of the recommendation, we did have specific areas mapped for where appropriate locations of different housing options would be located. We've since broadened that and taken the map out and are treating every neighborhood the same on this recommendation. We're not highlighting certain areas where new housing options, but rather the entire East area would be eligible for these additional housing options. However, as you said, it's not a complete elimination of single-family zoning. This is a balanced approach where we are recommending that single unit areas remain primarily single unit, but that all areas have the ability to have integrated additional housing options, including duplexes, triplexes, and in some unique circumstances, fourplexes. But that is a limited integration approach throughout the entire East area. We've also broadened it to say that as this policy is implemented, again, there will be a regulatory process that follows any planning process. So as we mentioned previously in the presentation, a plan is a guide. A plan is not a regulatory document. It guides future regulations. So just when the plan is completed and adopted, no zoning will change. That will require a follow-up process and a follow-up city council decision. In that process, what the East Area Plan is recommending is that we look at this question of integrating new housing options, not just in the East Area, but actually citywide. And that was in response to some of the concerns that we've heard about maybe potentially disproportionately impacting the East Area over other neighborhoods throughout the city.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks. Up next, we've gotten several questions about parking in East Area Plan. So instead of trying to pick out one. Stephen, can you just give us an explanation of what the East Area Plan proposes for parking and curbside management?
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for the question, Scott, and thanks for the folks who have asked this, because I do think it's a really important piece of this. So I think just, quickly addressing curbside management, it's what it sounds like. It's how we manage the, really accounted for curb space that a lot of folks are vying for different uses, whether it's parking, loading, accessing businesses and homes and things like that. So just trying to be a little more creative in how we manage it so that we help folks. These include all sorts of things like, adding opportunities for paid parking where that might be useful. Perhaps it's more time limits and things like that. There are other technologies that we can use to help with this. In addition, there are also some really good opportunities for shared parking. So where can maybe that lot that gets use for work needs during the day be available for other parking uses during the evenings, things like that. So adding a lot of that so that we can be a little more creative in how we use the curb space. I would say another recommendation in the plan that helps there is the TDM, which stands for Transportation Demand Management. And so that's really thinking about how we build new buildings when that happens, or retrofit old ones so that they make it easier for folks to get around without needing to drive for every trip. So helping maybe somebody who moves to one of these neighborhoods not need to do it with a car is another strategy there. So if you look at the parking section, there's a lot more detail on a few of those items I mentioned, but that hopefully helped answer some of the questions folks were asking.
Thanks, Stephen. So up next, we have a question from John Fernandez about no net loss affordable housing policy. All right, John, are you there?
Hello, I'm there.
Hi, go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, very simple question. The current draft talks about studying and developing strategies to ensure no net loss. The draft in March talked about exploring a no net loss policy. And I'm thinking after 3 years of effort, why can't we have a plan that advocates adoption of a no net loss policy on affordable housing? Since this is one of the highest priority subjects in the entire plan. That was my question.
Thanks, John, for that question. I think we absolutely agree with you that then we tried to make clear in that strategy that the goal is no net loss of our existing affordable housing stock. What we didn't want to commit to necessarily was a specific strategy that we would use to do that. What we want to do is make sure that we've looked at best practices, studied that, and then developed the strategy to implement it. That's kind of the thinking behind that. That we need to do that study piece. And I know we've been talking about this overall plan for a long time, but that really is kind of a next step for our housing department to really dive deep into that type of policy to come up with something that's regulatory or policy based to implement the no net policy goal. I don't know if Melissa wanted to jump in at all and add to that. Melissa Toddy from our housing department.
Liz, I think that's exactly right. Just on some initial research, some other communities and cities who have implemented specifically the no net loss policy itself have not been very successful in achieving that goal. So we certainly want to dig into, as Liz mentioned, what are those best practices? What is the most effective way to achieve that outcome, which may be different than specifically a no net loss policy.
Thanks, Melissa.
All right, great. So the next question is from John Desmond, and it's about early wins on transportation projects. So let's open this up to John. You there, John?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, well, so I just wondered if there's any discussion about identifying a specific early action item transformative transportation project that really sort of embodies the values of the plan. I'm thinking about conversion of a neighborhood street such as 16th Avenue or other low volume local street into a shared street. Given the success of other temporary shared streets elsewhere in the city, this would be a great move. And it might be a way of also incorporating some of the other ideas about permeable surfaces and green and water quality issues into the neighborhood. And it could be a project that everybody could sort of see and learn from. So that's my question is, have you thought about being that specific?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it, John. I'd say that, like you said, we've heard a lot of comments in the process, especially since those shared streets went in some other parts of the city. Folks calling out 16th exactly as a great place for that. And so we've been thinking, you know, is there an opportunity there? I'd say the most concrete immediate improvements we have coming in are the ones that Liz mentioned along 13th and 14th. So we heard countless comments through the process that either folks have had, you know, dangerous encounters on those streets, crashes or close calls, you know, people who live on those streets and witness crashes in front of their homes. And so we really honed in on some places that both had a lot of crash data, but then maybe also had comments from this plan that they're adjacent to schools, they connect to something great along Colfax, things like that. And so I'm pretty excited that we'll be working to put those in late this year, early next year, to really make some improvements at intersections that could use it for everybody, people driving, walking, and biking in those intersections. But I'd say noted and something we'll consider for improvements to street like 16th to maybe test that concept in the neighborhood.
All right, thanks. So up next, let's go to a question from Judy Baxter about how the East Area Plan interacts with the group living zoning changes. All right, are you there, Judy?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Really appreciate this chance to see where you've come. With regard, there's a lot of talk going on right now about the group living changes, zoning changes, and all three parts of it. I did see other people in the Q&A box also asking some questions related to this, and how, my simple question is, how does that zoning change, which is pretty eminent, at least to go to city council, and how does that intersect with the East Area Plan recommendations? And address.
Hi, Judy. Thanks for that. Oh, sorry. I missed the end of your question.
Yeah, just all three components. It's not just the unrelated individual component, it's the congregate living component, and it is the halfway house corrections component.
Okay, thanks for that question. And just so everyone's aware, this is something that we have in that FAQ document on the website. If you go to number 30 on there, so you can see a little more detail on the explanation. But the group living project is what we call like an implementation project. So it's the actual project to update zoning. The East Area Plan is a policy document, so it's the longer term 20-year vision and potential strategies. It doesn't change any regulations when it's adopted. It's really a policy document to help inform future decisions. So there might be zoning changes that come in the future, but they're not directly done through the East Area Plan. But the group living update and that text amendment is really, it's a citywide effort, so it's applies much more broadly than the East Area Plan to update our rules on residential uses, really to help reflect our need for more flexible housing options. And as you discussed, it covers a broad range of what those uses are, right? From how many unrelated people can live together in a home, all the way up to how we regulate residential care uses or community corrections. And that's, I'd say, again, very distinct in terms of it being a regulatory project. We have citywide guidance to look at updating those regulations, and that's where what that project is implementing. But it is distinct. In the East Area Plan, we are talking about the 20-year vision, not so much about individual people who live in a household, but still expressing those goals to provide diverse options and to have those housing options in our neighborhood. So there's, I'd say, general support for a variety of housing options is in the East Area Plan, but it's not regulatory the way that the group living project is. So that gives you a little more background. And again, if you can go to the FAQs, there's a little more in there.
Okay, up next, let's do a question from Leslie Twarogowski. Sorry about that, I'm sure I did that wrong. Leslie has a question about the Johnson and Wales campus. All right, are you there, Leslie?
I am here. Thank you for allowing me to ask my question, and thank you for all this hard work, Liz, and your whole team. This has been very exciting to watch, all these pictures coming through. And my question about Johnson Wales, which I live across the street from, I'm wondering if there's room in this plan to allow it to have uses other than educational uses, and specifically for possible affordable housing, given all the housing units that are over there already existing. I'm wondering if that kind of transitional housing and affordable housing would be allowed as a use under this plan. And thank you again.
Hi, Leslie. Thanks for that great question. I think, as probably most people on the call have heard, that Johnson & Wales recently announced that they will be closing their campus in Denver. And this is not something that we spent a whole lot of time talking about during this planning process because we were not anticipating it. And the plan shows it as a campus. We have had some initial conversations with Johnson & Wales and about their plans. They will be looking to sell it at some point. Their goal probably initially would be another educational user, but we have been talking to them to make it clear about what's in the East Area Plan and the goals that we have. And what we added to the plan, and this is on page 215, so it's in the South Park Hill section of the plan, we added a recommendation that should Johnson & Wales transition to another use besides an educational campus, so if that happens in the future, we're providing guidance for that. One is that we should do some more detailed planning of the site, so kind of a master planning process with community engagement, and also that it should help meet our goals, and that includes affordable housing. But we've also noted that there's historic resources on the site, public open space. It's also kind of close to areas where we are lacking in open space, community serving uses and services, and also our mobility connections and making sure we get good kind of pedestrian and bike connectivity through the site. So you can have a look at that recommendation, but we did add that so that should they change that use in the future, we have guidance in our plan about it helping to meet our goals. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Up next, we have a question from Alan Knepper about historic character and historic design. So, are you there, Alan?
Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
No, I just noticed in a lot of the presentations use the word encourage, but I'm just wondering if that has any kind of enforcement, or, I mean, as a developer, if I heard the word encourage, I'd pretty much just ignore it and do what I wanted to.
Hi, Alan, thanks for that question. And this is something that we hear a lot, and not just on historic preservation or design quality that you're asking about, but throughout the plan. And I'll just say that I totally understand where you're coming from on this. And it gets back to the purpose of a plan versus the purpose of a regulatory document, such as our zoning code. So remember that a plan is a guide, and it's not a specific regulatory document. So the zoning code, for example, is a document that is very specific, is full of numbers, and has much different language in it than a plan. And because a plan is just this guiding document that is intended to look long-term and articulate what outcomes that we want to see as these neighborhoods evolve, we use language that is more guiding and not specific regulatory language. So throughout the plan, you'll see terms such as should and encourage and study and evaluate, and all of that language is intended to guide future projects. And so, specific to your question, that there will be a follow-up process that includes looking at our regulations to encourage historic preservation. There's a variety of those recommendations, but those will include a separate process with community engagement to draft that very specific language, regulatory language on how that's enforced. And so while the plan is, again, guiding the outcome of what we want to see, the actual enforceable regulatory language is a follow-up process through our zoning or other codes that we would need to look at.
Okay, great. Up next, we have a question from Che about missing sidewalks. So are you there, Che?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, actually, this is his wife. I'm just Janice. I'm just using his website. That's or right. his log on. And yes, we've been through this planning process before, way back in 1994, when our neighborhood plan was incorporated in the Denver Plan 2000 comprehensive plan, and in it was plans and visions and policies and guidelines to put in sidewalks into these neighborhoods in order to make them more pedestrian friendly and safe to get around, frankly. And it seems like just more and more development is allowed without the basic infrastructure of something as simple as sidewalks, so that the people that move into the area can walk. So I have a question of, when is infrastructure such as sidewalks going to be a priority over development, or come in before you have a lot of more people coming in?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, and I think that's a great one that we heard comments on throughout this process. As you know, the East area, or the East Colfax neighborhood, and then several of the other neighborhoods are some of the largest gaps in our sidewalks in the city, or just have what we refer to as deficient sidewalks that are more narrow than our standard. And so I think, with your specific question on Quebec Street, there was initially a plan to, knock down homes, really expand that street. And we realized that it wouldn't, accomplish goals, not wise to be knocking down people's homes and kicking them out in the middle of a housing crisis for all the other things we've discussed tonight. And really we're able to rein that project in and say, what does this corridor need most? It needs a few new intersections, some safety improvements, but it really just needs sidewalks so folks aren't stuck walking in the dirt there. And so pretty excited that the rescoping of that project is pretty much solely focused on adding sidewalks, improving some bus stops, and making some intersections safer for people driving, walking, and biking. So that's a key piece of that. There are also some bond projects that are adding sidewalks to various neighborhoods. Not sure exactly what street that would be in this area, but there's some work going on there as well. And then lastly, our sidewalk program has really started focusing on adding sidewalks, to your point, because historically it was really only, you know, a large renovation or when someone would build something new that it would trigger the requirement to add a sidewalk in front of that property. And while sidewalks are expensive and difficult to add, it shouldn't be the requirement of the property owner to do that. So the city's been trying to step in and figure out how we can, you know, with limited resources do that. But I think specifically to Quebec, pretty excited that there'll be some vastly improved sidewalks on that street in the coming years.
All right, thanks, Stephen. Up next, we have a question from Richard M. about the incentive heights and the community benefits and how those will be defined. So, Richard.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, go ahead.
So certainly the two priorities highlighted at the beginning around affordable housing and open space are premised on the idea that we can incentivize developers by giving them more height for these benefits. This has only been done a couple places in Denver with limited success. How can we be clear in the plan about what those two benefits are, and potentially could the other benefit in the plan be deprioritized that's talking about preservation of existing buildings? Not sure how many existing historic buildings there are along Colfax.
Great. Thank you, Richard, for that question. That's a great question. So I'll take the first part of it first, and how can we be clear? So this gets back to my comment previously about the plan serving as a guide of what outcomes we want to see, and is not specific regulatory language. The specific regulatory language in this instance for the regulatory incentive for additional affordable housing, which is the priority for the community benefits listed in the plan, is underway now. And we can provide a follow-up link if you want to learn more about that project. It's called the Affordable Housing Zoning Incentive Project. That has kicked off, and it's looking at this question citywide to really figure out the exact numbers associated with how many units, at what level of affordability, in what circumstances, et cetera, and crafting that specific regulatory language that will go into our zoning code and be enforced on development. There will be opportunities to participate in that for anyone who wishes to weigh in. I will say one thing that we've clarified in that recommendation is that no additional height can be allowed until that decision has been made about the specific amount of affordable housing. So it's not one or the other. You can't have height and not have that specific benefit defined. And so until that those specifics are worked out in that regulatory process, no developer is eligible for that additional height. And to your last question about can we deprioritize a historic preservation along Colfax, we have heard that people would like to see, whether or not you agree with whether certain buildings are historic or not. What we've heard frequently throughout the 3-year process is that people want a diverse mix of different building forms along Colfax, including some of the unique architecture that's today, which may or may not be historic, but interesting roof forms, different styles of development, and not just sort of a uniform boxy type of development that is characteristic of like new apartments, for example. And so we are identifying a certain number of buildings that meet this sort of unique architecture, or sort of that classic Main Street feel that's kind of what's envisioned along Colfax. And many of those buildings are really under threat for demolition today because their zoning encourages greater use of those properties than what their current buildings are. And so we do think that that's a community benefit that we think is important moving forward, especially over the next 20 years. We have, specific to your question about prioritization, we have clearly said that affordable housing is the top priority with one exception, and that is in the Mayfair Town Center, where the priority is a public park with stormwater management. And the reason for that is twofold. One is those large properties in the Mayfair Town Center, and that's, for those who don't know where the Mayfair Town Center is, it's along Crimea, south of Colfax, where the large shopping center properties are. That really provides the best opportunity to add a meaningful public park in the area. And secondly, that's one of the most flood-prone areas in the East area. And so for those reasons, we feel that a public park is the priority for that area specifically. But for the rest of Colfax, the top priority is affordable housing, as recommended in the plan.
All right, next up we have a question from Tamir about multifamily housing and how that can be integrated into neighborhoods. You there, Tamir? Hello, Tamir?
Hello?
Hello, you're on. Go ahead and ask your question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so my question is, I believe multifamily housing should be allowed throughout. I think the restrictive zoning in this plan and throughout the city have created an affordable housing crisis and fostered inequities in segregated neighborhoods. Specifically, the Park Hill community, which I live, used to pride itself on being an integrated neighborhood. Yet many commentators here, and I think the boards of the community, want to keep pushing restrictive zoning, which keeps the neighborhood segregated. How can this be allowed? How can this plan keep fostering and prolonging segregation and the affordable housing crisis in the city?
Great, thank you for that question, Tamir. We agree that there is an affordable housing crisis, and we do need to address, as we mentioned in our opening presentation, the need for additional housing in the East area and actually throughout Denver as the population continues to grow. We also know that there is existing today a significant shortage of affordable housing. As Liz mentioned, about a third of residents in the East area are cost burdened. We are recommending a variety of strategies to address this. We have a whole section of the plan devoted to affordable housing that contains more than just zoning, which I think is part of what your question is asking about. But we do recommend using zoning as a tool to help solve the housing crisis. And specifically for multi-unit, adding multiple units in the neighborhoods themselves, we are recommending that. We are taking a balanced approach. We are not recommending a wholesale elimination of single unit zoning. One of the reasons we aren't doing that, aside from people who have said that they value that aspect of their existing neighborhoods, is that many of these neighborhoods have very strong historic architecture that we don't want to, as an unintended consequence, create rules that would encourage significant demolition of these buildings in neighborhoods. And so we've taken a very careful approach to crafting this recommendation to say that preserving existing homes is a value as we add in multiple units. And so as we can do that in a way that keeps the existing home and repurposes some as duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes based on the unique forms of those buildings, and if they're compatible and they're on compatible lots, that should be allowed. We are saying that it should be allowed in a way that preserves the single family, primarily the single family character of these neighborhoods, but that does allow an integration of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes throughout the entire East area. So it is a balanced approach. It's not it's not a complete preservation of single family zoning, and it's not a complete elimination of single family zoning. It's really an integration of these new housing options into neighborhoods. And from a basic market perspective, it's probably unlikely that we would see a wholesale elimination of single family zoning anyway. And so this balanced approach of integrating housing, we think is a way to preserve this historic design and the architecture of these neighborhoods that so many people value and really are some of the best in the city, and in a way that helps ease the housing shortage and housing crisis in Denver.
Okay, great. Up next, we have a question from Brian Hyde about BRT and the density recommended in the plan. So, are you there, Brian?
Okay, now I think I'm on.
Yep.
The concern I have, and I'm saying this as a person who spent almost 30 years riding RTD to and from work, how realistic is it that this plan centers itself so much on BRT, on Colfax in COVID time, and when can we expect that people will be riding transit in the numbers that were foreseen a year ago?
I'll start with that. This is Mike Gill. I'm the project manager for the Colfax BRT project. And it is something that we're looking at in terms of what are the impacts to transit and going forward. And honestly, right now, there's not a lot of good data. That said, RTD continues to collect data on their boardings and alightings on all of their routes. And the 15 and 15L combined are actually two of the better performing routes in the system still. It points to that while those two routes serve a lot of downtown commuters, there's also a lot of essential services workers or essential workers that are transit dependent and using those routes. For example, the 15L is running at 70% of its pre-COVID capacity, and the 15 is at about 61%. So combined, those two routes have seen, it's substantial, no doubt, a 33% drop in their ridership, but across the whole RTD service area, the drop is substantially more. So again, the 15 and 15L are being shown as being two of the most important transit routes in the city. So I think it points to how important transit is to this whole corridor. As we move into the next phase of this project, we've selected a consultant to go through the preliminary design and National Environmental Policy Act clearances to set us up for potential federal funding as the project moves forward. That process, we'll be kicking that off later this fall, and that includes a very robust public outreach effort where we'll be soliciting input as the design goes forward, reviewing station locations, looking at the details, doing the traffic analysis to identify what mitigation strategies or mitigation triggers we'll need on local streets and streets around Colfax. But we're encouraged by the data that we're seeing even in the COVID impacted times. And again, I think to answer the specific question you had, looking at the data that we've gotten from RTD to date, this is one of the most, if not the most important transit corridor in the RTD network.
And Kurt or Liz, do you want to tackle the sort of density half of that question and how the BRT plays into that?
Sure. So in terms of looking at compatibility for additional housing and its relationship to a transit service, we did look at specific lots. It's taking this, again, a balanced approach along Colfax, identifying the larger lots that are close to the planned BRT stops as being those that are most suitable for additional height and development. And one of the reasons why the larger lots are so important is we are recommending that we increase our design standards to help protect adjacent houses in a way that improves the architecture, has height step backs and setbacks and step downs so that new buildings fit in well with the neighborhood. And we have some renderings of what we mean by that in the plan. And so in addition to that, what we are saying along Colfax is different from what we would normally do along a planned high capacity transit route. And actually it's different from what any city really around the world internationally, the planning practice that you typically do along a high capacity transit route is you would automatically allow more people to live near those transit stops so more people can benefit from those improved transit services. That is a practice called transit-oriented development. It's been used in Denver, and again, most cities around the world have used this practice as a way to benefit their community from increased transit services, lower air quality issues, lower carbon emissions, manage traffic better. What we are saying along Colfax, however, is a little different from the standard TOD planning practice. What we're saying is that you are not allowed to automatically add more housing along Colfax just because there's a planned BRT route. We're actually saying that you need to actually meet a higher standard of community benefits. And so you would need to income restrict and provide affordable housing if you want to take advantage of that additional zoning near those BRT stops, or provide another community benefit such as a public park in the Mayfair Town Center. So that policy is different from the normal TOD planning practice, where we would automatically allow density just because it's near a transit service, for example. And it should be noted that today the transit service along Colfax, the 15 and the 15L, are the highest outside of the free mall. On the free mall bus on 16th Street moves the most amount of people of any bus line in the RTD system. And as Mike mentioned, it continues to provide a key link for healthcare workers because there's a number of hospitals and health clinics along Colfax. And so for those reasons, when you combine that with the affordable housing shortage in the East area, that in itself warrants encouraging more affordable housing near the existing 15L stops today. And as those services get improved, it'll be even more important.
All right, we have a few folks who called in who have questions. So we're gonna go to a couple of those. Since we don't have your names here, when we unmute you, if you could introduce yourself and then ask your question, that would be great. We're going to go with the number ending in 7446 first here. So go ahead and introduce yourself and then ask your question, please. Hello, are you there? Okay, maybe we will try you again in just a minute. This is not working. Let's try the number ending in 6923 then. All right, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself and ask your question, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hello, yes. Please go ahead.
Yes, good, okay. Yes, so my question is with regard to a very specific area, which I believe the zoning is, they're suggested, the zoning is going to change. And this concerns my property, my garden, a communal garden, our home, and it would be a 5-story rise going right up behind us, which, as you can imagine, is devastating for our property values and for us as a family and as our quality of life. There is another property on Bel Air, I believe Bel Air and Colfax, is zoned for a 5-story building already. So why would we be adding within one block radius or region, why would we be adding another bus stop and this housing, this type of high-rise housing right in that specific place? Why have you chosen the corner of Cherry Street when you already have the corner of Bel Air? Thank you.
I thank you for that question. And so the property on the, I think you're referring to the northwest corner of Colfax and Cherry, which is an auto zone property today. So what we've evaluated along Colfax, and in particular the BRT stop spacing, is there's a stop of the BRT system planned at Elm to the east of that location, and not another stop between Elm and Colorado. And that's if you know, obviously you know that stretch of Colfax, that's a pretty far distance. In fact, that's the largest gap between BRT stops along the whole planned route. And so what the recommendation is to evaluate that gap. So again, that segment that is in the middle between those two stations, and that runs from roughly Cherry to Bel Air, and looking at a potential additional BRT stop in that area so people can better access that service. What the plan is saying is that if that area does meet the test of adding an additional BRT stop, then that particular property, that AutoZone property on that corner of Cherry and Colfax, meets all of the other criteria that we've used uniformly and consistently along the entire Colfax corridor for additional 2 stories of height, because it's a large property. I should mention though that there are setbacks and height step downs and a number of other design requirements that we are recommending in the case of an additional height. And we'd be happy to follow up with you on more specifics of how those work. We have a rendering that would show how that height would transition in a compatible way from 5 stories down to single story. There are some good examples along Colfax today where that height transition from 5-story to a single story home works, and we're actually recommending an improvement, even further improvement than what our current zoning has in terms of those setbacks. And so I'd be happy to follow up with you on any specifics at a later date, and we can leave our contact information.
All right, let's try 7446 one more time and see if they're available. Are you there? 7446. Guess not. So let's do one last question here, since we're getting close to 7:30. So for the last question, let's do KS, who has a question about some specifics on the Mayfair proposal. So are you there, KS? Okay. Maybe I can just ask their question for them. They're not able to ask it. The question is, what is the orientation of the Mayfair Center map you showed, and what would be removed, and exactly where would the park be? So just give a little more detail on what that graphic showed versus what's there now.
Sure. Thanks for that question, Kate, or Kay. I'll just bring up this rendering again. And just so everyone knows, this is what we call an illustrative concept. So, these are not publicly owned properties. We don't have direct control over what exactly happens here, but we show this rendering to give everybody an idea and help visualize the recommendations in the plan. And what you're seeing here, and if you go to the plan, this rendering is labeled in the plan, and you can read those labels. But this is a Cremeria right here. I don't know if you can see my pointer or not. Okay, that's Cremeria here, and this is 14th, and Colfax is up here on this part of the rendering. So this is showing a new park space on one of the grocery store sites, with the grocery store relocated into the base of a building. And you can see City Floral here, and some of the older buildings shown there in the white. And this is showing infill of potential new buildings on some of the property there. And this is all within the kind of commercial area of Mayfair Town Center today. And again, it's an illustrative drawing, but we do think that there's opportunity, and you can see that on the height map of where we're saying 7 stories on some of these larger parcels that have larger parking lots that maybe could be reconfigured into a garage to, again, achieve that community park space that we're lacking and help address our flooding problems. Oh, thanks. Gonna be ready to, I think we're right close to 7:30. So thank you everybody for your, I know we didn't get to everyone's questions or comments. We will certainly share all of those on our website. We'll update our FAQs as needed to help address all of those. Thank you for spending the time with us tonight. I just quickly want to touch base on our next steps, and Kurt mentioned some of these in the beginning of the presentation, but we do have that second draft available on our project website, so feel free to please review that, send us any comments. We've tried to make that as easy as possible by labeling on the plan where we've made an update, and there's also a link on the website to a list of where those substantive changes have been made. We do have what we call an informational item coming up at Planning Board next week. This is not a public hearing, and the Planning Board doesn't make any recommendations. It's an opportunity for us to give them an update on the planning process. So anyone's welcome to listen in or watch that meeting. And then we will have a steering committee meeting on September 23rd. Any additional comments that we're getting on the plan draft, we'll be sure to share those with the steering committee. And we're tentatively looking at a planning board, so the public hearing with the planning boards, this is when they would make a recommendation for October 7th. And then that would lead us towards public hearings for City Council through November. And we do welcome public comment leading up to and all the way through the City Council public hearing. So with that, I think we're right at 7:30. Thank you again to everybody for joining us tonight, and I hope you will take time to review that next draft and send us any comments. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.